Chapter 23, Part 1. You save everyone, but who saves you? The 11th of March 2019, 7:50 p.m. I was sat in my room reading the leaflets that I'd picked up from the hotel lobby when my phone buzzed. An unknown number, but I was ready for it, and I switched on the dictaphone before answering and turning on the speaker mode of my phone. I was able to record the conversation with Mr. Patterson. He had an Essex accent but was quite softly spoken. Not what I was expecting from an ex-market trader in the East End. Our conversation went something like this. Mr. Patterson. Hello, good evening. Am I speaking to Mr. Paul Brunskill? Me. You are. Thank you for the call. My mother told me about your online conversation. I'm very grateful for you taking out the time to call me. I believe you knew Mr. Grimshaw from his time on Brick Lane. I briefly explained who I was and why I was searching for Ernie. I didn't tell him anything about where I had been so far or what I already knew. I didn't want to paint a picture of the man from other people's opinions and experiences. I wanted Mr. Patterson to be open and honest and not hold back for fear of offending myself or others. He said, I haven't heard from or spoken to Ernie since 1979. You will forgive me if my memory lets me down on occasion. I'm 86 now. My wife tells me I'm still as sharp as a tack, but she flatters me. What I wouldn't give for my youth again. When we reminisce, we tend to remember the good over the bad, don't we? And we also exaggerate the truth to embellish a story. That Facebook group site is full of such tales. I recall half of the stories talked about on there from my time on the market, and the truth is, there's about 30% truth and 70% legend. But a good story is more thrilling than a true one, isn't it? When I read your mother's message, I couldn't help but respond. She was referring to a bloke I had not thought about for many a year, and as soon as I read it, all those memories came flooding back. Some of the best times of my life were on that market, the best times. We had a cracking community spirit there. We all helped each other. We were all there for one another. We socialised together. We had each other's backs, and we shared what we had. It wasn't an environment of one-upmanship. We were all just looking to make a living and get by. It was healthy competition, but we all looked after each other. The money was good. There was always a few quid to be had, but it was not our driving force. In the late 60s and early 70s, I would go so far as to say you would not find a better group of work colleagues and friends the world over. We were like one big family. Those were the golden years. Anyway, about this Ernie. Is there anything in particular you would like to know about my old mate? Like with all my interviews, I like people to talk rather than be guided by me. I told him I was very grateful to him and to just tell me everything he knew, anything at all. I reiterated that I was just appreciative of anything he cared to tell me. And once assured, he carried on. He said, Our stall had been in the family since the early 60s. We had a good pitch on the lane. As well as the passing trade, we had a good number of regular customers from the local community. We were an established family business. My father and grandfather ran the stall before me. We didn't need to blow our own trumpet. It was never my style or my old man's, but thankfully we never needed to either. Our reputation for good service was enough. We didn't need to shout about it. The stall next to ours was owned by an old Jewish guy. Nice chap. Sold trinkets. Nothing special. Beads, bracelets, music boxes, that kind of thing. Nice man. When he left the pitch lay unused for a number of weeks. That was a rare thing. On our market, that pitch was prime real estate, but for whatever reason it stayed empty. We later found out that the old guy owed money on the rent and he was asking too much for it in an attempt to pay off his debts. He was a stubborn bugger and wouldn't sell on the cheap, even when he was in trouble. But it was around then that the boys came along and persuaded him to sell the pitch to them on what seemed like favourable terms. I think they told him They would clear his debt for the first 3 months, and if they did, he would sell the pitch to them for half his original asking price. It was a bold move, a confident one on their part, but he couldn't really refuse. If they failed, he had nothing to lose, but if they were successful, he was debt-free and free to start afresh. Needless to say, they were successful, very successful. They were just so likable and approachable. As with any new people, you're always skeptical and suspicious. Doubt now, trust later, wary of newcomers and strangers, but it didn't take them long to win us over. My father loved them both instantly. They made his day. He loved going into work next to them. He felt alive. They had him in stitches most days. He would have tears rolling down his cheeks when he returned home at night, telling us what they'd been up to. They were so popular, and they made everyone around them feel special too. I think they added another couple of years to my dad's life, you know. He felt wanted and needed again. The boys needed him too. They genuinely sought his opinion and advice. Selling carpets is hardly rocket science, but they made him feel so wanted. He was a mentor to them. And what a laugh they were. Half the people gathered around the stalls there were there for the banter. It seemed more like a social club than a workplace, and that was down to Ernie and Curtis. My mum used to feed them. She would bring them soup or a hot meal for their supper. She would treat them like part of the family, and none of us minded because that's what they felt like to us all. At this point, I thought it would be appropriate to ask him about Curtis Long. Who was he, and how did Ernie know him? He told me. They arrived together from the States. I seem to recall that Curtis had worked in New York for a time, having arrived there from St. Lucia. I don't think Ernie knew him even then, though. I think they only just met on the ship. They must have struck up a friendship there. Well, they did have a similar sense of humour, both very witty and aware of everything and everyone around them. They seemed to gauge their audience and know what to say and when to say it. They were a right double act. Curtis had family in London. Ernie had his own place, and Curtis lived with relatives somewhere on the Isle of Dogs. I know both he and his family suffered awfully from racist abuse. It was commonplace back then. They almost accepted it as something they had to endure. They took it in their stride, so to speak. It wasn't right. Even then, people knew it wasn't right. I won't accept this, it was all just how it was back then nonsense. Yes, times were different. Yes, people had limited understanding of different cultures. But a good person understands and accepts another good person. What does colour have to do with it? Anyway, on the market Curtis was safe. He had another family there. He was loved. I don't recall one incident where he received any kind of abuse because of the colour of his skin. And if he had, and had we known about it, it would never been tolerated. He was one of us. A market trader. We didn't care where you came from. You were one of us. And both he and Ernie were very much part of the team. Anyway, Curtis was such a ray of sunshine. He was so full of beans. Always smiling, always laughing. Like I say, he just had one of those really infectious laughs. When he started laughing, you couldn't help but laugh along with him. The joke he was telling wasn't really important. It might not have even been funny. You just laughed because he was laughing. Ernie could spark off him with a quip or a look. He knew how to play him. He knew how to tickle his funny bone. I remember one guy, a street cleaner called Colin. He would come through the market on off his designated route just to chat to Ernie and Curtis. He would leave doubled up with laughter. It made his day. He never bought anything, but we loved seeing him approaching our stalls. I remember my dad saying about Curtis, "If he stops laughing, we'll lose 50% of our business." We didn't lose 50%, but it wasn't far short of that. Mr. Patterson tailed off then. He had suddenly reached a point he was always planning to get to. I waited for him to talk again. There were a few awkward seconds of silence, and then he continued.